Thank you and good morning. It's nice to be here. How are you all feeling this morning? Did you get to the dinner last night? There are a few sore heads out there, are there? So, as Claudio said, greetings, welcome. Greetings from Aotearoa, New Zealand. My name, as was said, is Lance King. I was born in a very small town called Kirikiriroa, also known as Hamilton, in New Zealand, within sight of the mighty Waikato River. And these days I live fairly close to there in a place called Whaingaroa, also known as Raglan, which is famous for left-hand surf breaks, and I live within sight of Mount Karioi and the Tasman Sea. So, greetings, welcome from Aotearoa. Thank you very much for coming this morning. I'd particularly like to thank Maripe and Bianca and Shannon, who were instrumental in organising everything to get me here. So thank you very much. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Before I start, I'd just like to make one recommendation. I don't know many of the speakers here at this conference, but I'd really like to recommend one for you. And she is the last speaker at this conference, and her name is Sarah Kay, and she is a spoken word poet. And I was lucky enough to go to Sarah Kay's session at the Cancun conference in Mexico in July. And she delivered a 75-minute presentation, and in that presentation, in 75 minutes, she brought tears to my eyes 3 times. And I'm a bloke, a Kiwi bloke. You know, we don't do emotions. And so she's absolutely fabulous. If you want a small taste of Sarah's work, you go to TED Talks and look for her name, and she's got a poem there called If I Had a Daughter. And it's an inspirational poem, and it was especially inspirational in my family because I do have a daughter. I have a wonderful daughter. And Sarah's work was inspirational enough to get my daughter to do the hardest thing she's ever done in her life, which is to speak to a huge group of people in a competitive situation and deliver her spoken word poetry. And I think it was largely Sarah that got her to do that, unbeknownst. And my daughter has gone on from strength to strength since then, and 2 weeks ago spoke to our Parliament in New Zealand. So yes, it's phenomenal. So make sure you no one's allowed to leave the conference early. You must get to that very last session tomorrow. You'll enjoy it. Now, I don't only have a daughter, I also have 3 sons, ages from 21 to 29. And all 4 of my children got together on the occasion of my last birthday and pooled all their resources and bought me a card. And I'd like to share it with you because I think it's great. Here it is. You can't see that, but on the front it says, "No, no, no, you're not old." And inside it says,
"Oh, you're not old. You're not that old. No, there's lots of things older than you. There's a ton of things. Redwood trees, rocks, most of the planet."
Did you hear that? It said, "You're not old. There's lots of things older than you. There's redwood trees. There's rocks. Most of the planets are older than you." And I thought that was lovely. But in a large way, it is true. I am really, really old. Really, really old. I mean, I can still remember a time before television. Imagine that, before television. 1962, the first television arrived in our street. A little old lady down the street, she got the very first television, a little black and white TV, and the biggest thrill of my life back then was on 6:30 on a Tuesday night, my sister and I were allowed to walk down the street to this little old lady's house and watch I Love Lucy. That was the thrill. You see, I belong to a unique generation, a generation that I call the how generation, as in, how does that work? Because we've seen everything. We've seen every change. You know, I can remember times before television, through black and white TVs, colour TVs, and now we've got 3-dimensional 52-inch flat screen home theatre entertainment systems. I can remember before computers. Computers the size of houses, moving to desktops, moving to laptops, and now these days, of course, we have little things like this. And apparently this thing here has more computing power than was used to send Apollo 11 to the moon. It's astonishing. We have lived through so much change. And telephones. You know, I can remember when a telephone, you put a finger in the dial and you turned the dial to make a call. Of course, music. You know, we've gone from, in my lifetime, 10-inch, no, that was probably a little before my time, but we've gone from 12-inch discs to CDs, to downloadable music, to iTunes, to iStore, to all the ways you can access music these days. And in every field, and of course the internet. I can remember before the internet, through the internet, to where we are now. And the thing about the how generation, my generation, is that we have coped. We have managed, which goes to show we're great learners. But how have we done that? You see, I don't know what happens in your household, but in my household, when you get a new piece of technology, you know, it might be a new phone or a new TV or a new camera or maybe even a fridge or a microwave or anything at all that's loaded with technology, what do? Well, in my household, you turn to the youngest member of the family and you say, have you seen this? It's really cool. Have a go with this. And then you go away and you leave them for an hour or so. And then you come back and you say, how was it? Can you show me how to use it? And this is what we do. This is the how generation. We know how. And of course, there's been books written about the how generation. How many of you know Malcolm Gladwell's book, The Outliers? Read that book? Lots of people? Excellent. Did you like that book? Great book, wasn't it? I hated it. I hated it for two reasons. One was, in that book, Malcolm Gladwell said that the major advantage that Bill Gates and Steve Jobs had in being in the right place at the right time, being the right age to take advantage of the growth of the computer industry, to get involved in software and hardware development, to change all our lives and change the whole world and amass vast personal fortunes on the way. The biggest advantage they had was being born in 1955. That's all you needed. Now, I was born in 1955. And I can still remember my first interaction with computers was when I was doing my undergraduate degree, Massey University, food technology, back in the early 70s. And we had this one paper where we had to do this analysis and we had to use a computer to do it. Now the computer took up half a room and it had a big wall with a couple of dials on it and a box, a hole. And in that hole you had to feed punch cards. And as I recall, it took something like 250 punch cards to solve one simple multivariate analysis. And if you got one hole wrong on one card, it wouldn't run. And so you had to do it over and over and over and over again. And I hated it. And I can remember swearing blind that I would have nothing to do with computers ever again until somebody made them user-friendly. So thanks to Bill and Steve, they did eventually. And the other reason I hated the Outliers book was that Gladwell also said that the major advantage, people like Wayne Gretzky and Michael Jordan and 30% of Australian professional AFL players and nearly 50% of Canadian professional ice hockey players and nearly 50% of US professional baseball players, the major advantage they had in making sport their thing and being picked for the best teams and turning sport into the way in which they amassed vast personal fortunes was being born in January or February. Yeah, I was born in January 1955. And all I can say is, I guess I was big for my age. But with me, it was kind of clumsiness and awkwardness. But probably the most important thing about that Gladwell's book, Outliers, was how he explained about how it takes 10,000 hours to get good at anything. 10,000 hours. It takes 10,000 hours, no matter what your ability or talent, still takes 10,000 hours to be a good software developer. It takes 10,000 hours to be a good hardware developer, to be a good sports person in every field, to be a good chess player, to be a good dentist, to be a good doctor, to be a good architect, to be a good engineer, to be a good plumber, to be a good carpenter, to be a good cabinet maker. It takes 10,000 hours. It takes 10,000 hours to be a good teacher. Now, most teachers can amass 10,000 hours in about 10 years full-time teaching. Now me, I've been a teacher for 27 years, but I don't teach every day. So I think I'm getting close to that 10,000 hours, but I think I'm still getting better each time I teach, so I'm not quite there yet. But it's an interesting thing, this idea of a master teacher. Just let me see for a minute. I wonder if you could dim the lights so I can see the audience just a bit. Could I? No? Okay, I'll step up here. Could you put your hand up, please, if you are a teacher or you ever have been a teacher in your life? Put your hand up if you are a teacher or you ever have been a teacher. That's just about everyone. Just keep your hands up there for a second and put your hand down again if you are presently a full-time teacher. Put your hand down if you're presently a full-time teacher. So all the hands that I can see now are people who used to teach who don't teach anymore. Thank you. Put your hands down, please. Or teach very little anymore. Now this is the nub of, I think, one of the most serious problems in education. I mean, I love teaching, but I think it's the craziest profession. Because it's a profession where the better at it you get, the less likely you are to do it. It's crazy. It seems like it's almost designed to extract teaching expertise out of the classroom. I mean, I've worked in over 200 schools worldwide. And I know so many principals and deputy principals who are brilliant teachers who never get to teach anymore. And I think this is at the heart of a problem in education. Where are the master teachers? You know, if we want to change education, one thing we could do is we could somehow organise it so someone can stay in teaching and continue to be ambitious, continue to receive more income, continue to have better prospects, better possibilities for advancement, better promotional possibilities, continue to move up in what they feel they're worth, and yet stay teaching. That would be a way to solve the problem, wouldn't it? Now, you see, I don't think teaching is actually a profession. If it is, it's the only profession in the world with a salary cap. I think it's a vocation. I think people teach because it feeds their heart. They teach because it's their way of making a difference in the world. It's their way of changing the world, one child at a time. And I think that is something much more profound and much deeper and probably much more important. And so most of you have been or are teachers, so can you remember the moment when you decided that teaching was your vocation? Because I can remember my moment, and I'd like to share that with you, if I can. Excuse me. And my moment happened in the early 90s. And by then I had completed a food technology degree, and I'd worked in the food industry. I was kind of a food scientist for quite a number of years, and I'd ended up teaching food technology in a technical university, and then I'd gone into teaching professional development, teaching the teachers for a few years. And then I'd taken the work that I'd been doing with teachers and transferred it into a program for students. And I was testing this program out. And I can remember distinctly, one day, I was in a small town in north of Hamilton, New Zealand, called Ngarawahia. And I had a class coming in, and I had this one-day program I was going to run with this class. And the children all filed in, first thing in the morning. And as they filed in, I noticed one person who stood out. There was a girl in the group who stood out, and she stood out because she was dirty. She had dirty clothes, she had dirty hair, and I thought, whoa, that's a bit unusual. Anyway, so they sat down and we started the class, and we worked through a few little bits and pieces, and we get to an exercise that I was doing then, which is a visualization exercise. And what I do is I get the students up and I get them to do a certain stretch, and then I get them to close their eyes and imagine something, and then they repeat the stretch and they get better performance out of themselves, and they learn a connection between visualization and performance. So I got all the students up, got them all standing up, and got them to do the first physical stretch part, and then I asked them all to close their eyes and imagine. And this girl was standing right in front of me at the back of the room, but in the centre, and she would not close her eyes. And I thought, well, normally I would kind of hassle until I got what I wanted, but no, she was standing there and she would not close her eyes. And I looked at her and I noticed she was scared. She was scared to close her eyes. So I thought, okay, just leave that. So I went through the exercise with all the rest of the students, and that was fine, that all worked fine. And at the end of the exercise, we went and had our break. And I went to the staff room, and I mentioned this to the teacher, and she said, oh yeah, I should have told you about that. Yes, we know about her. She said she has a history of serious physical and sexual abuse. And he said it's all over now, and she's in recovery, and she's getting lots of counselling, and she's getting all the help that we can give her, but she's totally shut down. She does not participate. She does not communicate. She does not work with others. She stays isolated. She stays by herself. She never ever smiles. She's totally shut down. And we're just hoping that eventually, with enough help, enough support, she will break through and she will come back to the best she can be. And I was left with this. So I thought, whoa, okay. But you see, I was quite well read at that time in all sorts of areas. And I'd read Julian Rotter on locus of control, internal versus external locus of control. And I'd read Martin Seligman on learned helplessness, as some people learn to be helpless, and optimism and pessimism. I'd also read Viner and Haider on attribution theory. And I'd read Carol Dweck. Now, I guess most of you are familiar with Carol Dweck. She's very famous these days with her mindset theory, but this was in the early 90s, so she hadn't developed that theory then, and she was focused much more on ability versus effort at that time. The idea being that if you attach approval to a child's effort, then you're connecting approval with something over which a child has some control. So they're more likely to put in more effort if you focus on effort. If you focus on ability as a connection with success, you're less likely to get change because ability is more of a fixed thing. It's less likely that the child will be able to have any control over that and put in any, and increase that ability. So the whole effort versus ability thing. And what I'd done is I'd created this exercise, and it was a juggling exercise. So it was actually an attribution retraining exercise, cunningly disguised as a juggling exercise. So what I was doing was I'd put students in a situation where I'd say to them, you're going to learn, in the next 15 minutes you're going to learn how to do this. This is what I'd say to the students. And so they're in a situation where they have to learn something new that looks pretty challenging. And I get them to start to notice the attributions they were making, the connections they were making, the causality in their own mind between success and failure and an activity of learning something new. And the idea being that I got them to change their attributions and do this activity, and they would have more success and everything would be wonderful. So we start off with this exercise. And we start off first with one ball. And this girl is at the back of the room, and she's got one ball, and she can throw one ball, no problem at all. No problem at all. So then we get to two balls. And she picks up two balls, and yeah, no problem at all. She does two balls, no problem at all. And then we get to three balls. And she goes, I can't. Now, the attribution shift I was after was from I can't, which if you think about it, is an ability attribution for failure. I can't. I don't have the ability. It is not within me. It's not possible for me to do this thing. I don't have that ability. It's not something that will ever change, that will ever be fixed. It suggests a fixed state of mind, a fixed mindset. Now, I was trying to get her to shift from I can't, not to I can. Because that doesn't actually work terribly well. Because when you say to a child, well, you can juggle, just say I can juggle, it creates a cognitive conflict because they haven't done it yet. They don't think they can. You're getting them to say I can. It doesn't actually work. What I was trying to get her to do was to shift from I can't to I haven't yet. And if you think about it, I haven't yet is an effort attribution for failure. The reason I haven't done it yet is just that I haven't done it yet. If I haven't yet learned to juggle, well, I haven't yet learned to juggle. It's just a fact. But it's attributing the failure to maybe a lack of strategy or maybe a lack of effort. So when a child says to themselves, I haven't done that yet, they're actually suggesting at a deeper level that maybe they can. It's possible that they might. So anyway, she's standing there and she's got the ball and she's going, no, I can't. I can't. And I go up to her and I say, are you sure that's a can't? Or is it just a haven't yet? She goes, no, I can't. I can't. I'm going, yeah, are you sure that's a can't? I'm trying as gently as possible. I'm saying, are you sure that's a can't? Or is it just a haven't yet? And we went on and on like this for a while. And in the end, she says, all right, just to get rid of me. She says, all right, I haven't done it yet. Are you happy? I haven't done it yet. And then she goes, and she smiled. And in that moment, the whole world changed. In that moment, she broke through. In that moment, she learned that by a very small change in her own mental processes can produce a huge change in performance. She learnt that she could break free from helplessness. She learnt that it was possible for her to have success in learning simply by taking some control of her own internal processes. And I like to think that that was a very significant event for her. Certainly for the rest of that day, she contributed. She was part of the group. She talked to other students. She did all the things that were required of her. And she was just back to normal, for that day at least. And I think that was very significant. And it wasn't just, the world didn't just change for her, the world changed for me as well. Because in that moment I learnt that huge personal change can have very small genesis. And I learnt that it's teaching that makes the difference. She could have not made that breakthrough. She couldn't have made that change from a textbook or from a computer screen. She could have only made that change by being connected with a teacher. And I was just lucky enough to be the person in the space at the time. And the other thing that I learned at that moment was I learned that it is possible to teach affective skills. These are the skills of overcoming challenges, the skills of perseverance, the skills, I guess, of learning to concentrate, learning to focus, learning to be more resilient, learning to be more mindful, learning to manage anger, manage impulsiveness. All the affective skills, I learned that it's possible to teach affective skills. And now, 17 years and 150,000 students later, I'm still doing the same thing. So that was my moment. And as you're all teachers, maybe you've had moments like that too. I don't know. Can you just take one moment to think for a minute? Can you think of an experience in your life where your teaching made a huge change to a child, or where your teaching made a huge change to yourself, or where someone else's teaching made a huge change to you? Can you think of a moment like that from your own life? And can you turn to your neighbour and share that moment, just for a minute? Do that now. Go. Okay. By the sound of things, you all could think of a moment like that. And it's a moment that just teaches us that teachers are important. And so now the second thing I want to bring up is that what is the ultimate aim of your teaching, or teaching in your school? What is the ultimate aim of your school? What is the point of school-based education? I think there are probably four possibilities, aren't there? The point, the overall aim of our school-based education. One is to get students to gain wonderful qualifications. Another one would be to get students into jobs. Another one would be to get students into university. But there's a fourth one, isn't there? And what is the purpose, the real purpose of education? Is it to produce lifelong learners? Would you agree? Is that actually the overall aim that underpins all those other things? And you might not call them lifelong learners. You might call them, I've been in education a long, long time. I've seen all these movements go through. We've had self-directed learners. We've had self-managed learners. We've had self-regulated learners. We've had autonomous learners. We've had independent learners, lifelong learners, self-motivated learners. It all means the same thing, doesn't it? Children who can learn without teachers, who've gained all the skills that they need to become self-regulated in their learning. And I guess you've got to ask, if that's the overall point of our education, how well are we doing? In my work, I get to work in some very venerable institutions, wonderful places, with a long, long history. I can think of one. Every year I go to Bermuda and I work in a school named Warwick Academy in Bermuda. Now, Warwick Academy was founded in 1662. So it's just had its 350th anniversary. I also get to work in a school in London called Harrow. And Harrow was set up in 1572. It had 440 years. And there's actually evidence on the Harrow site of a school being there since 1243. Which, if I've got my maths right, is 769 years. Now, I think that if you went back to the very first day of school at Warwick Academy, or the very first day of school at Harrow, or the very first day 769 years ago of the school that was there before Harrow, you'd recognise one thing. You'd recognise the teaching. You'd recognise the classroom setup, where there'd be one teacher standing in front of a group of students controlling access to information. Teaching by transmission, being the font of all knowledge and controlling the situation. Now, you see, I think that the biggest impediment to developing self-regulated learning in school today are our teaching methods, the way in which we teach. And I think it's time for a change. Just go back a second. Just think, what does it take to be a self-regulated learner? What does it take to be a lifelong learner? I think it takes three factors. And I call them efficacy, agency, and action. And efficacy is self-belief. A lifelong learner believes that it's possible for them to have success in learning. Agency is the skills, techniques, and strategies of effective learning. They've got to know how to learn well. And action is the opportunity to take action, make mistakes, and fail well. You put those three things in place, we've got lifelong learning. I'll just break each one down a little bit for you, give you some examples. We look at efficacy, self-belief. How do you build self-belief in children that learning success is possible for them? Well, I think there's a few things you can do. One is role models. Obviously, children need role models of people who have made success for themselves out of education, out of learning. And I know in lots and lots of schools we bring in guest speakers and we have quotes on the wall and we have all sorts of wonderful things connecting children with role models, but often they are so lofty. We have prime ministers, we have presidents, we have Mahatma Gandhi, we have Nobel Prize winners, we have all these lofty, wonderful role models to aspire to, absolutely fabulous, but so far beyond your average student's reach or your average student's understanding that maybe they don't actually connect with them as a good role model of education success. You see, one thing I don't think we do terribly well in schools is alumni, is follow students who used to be at that school. Just imagine if at your school that the records were kept and links were established between every student who had been there for maybe 10 years after they leave school, or maybe even 20 years after they leave school. And that someone somewhere along the line went and got in touch with those people and found out all those people who had used their education to create success for themselves. And I don't mean world-shattering success, just reasonable success, creating a good life for themselves and their family. Anyone who's gone out and done something with their mind, Anyone who's set up a small business and done well. Anyone who's worked in an organisation and done well. Anyone who has achieved anything. Anyone who has gained a high qualification and done well. Anyone who's done anything using their mind. And imagine if people went out and actively took photographs of those people and wrote a little paragraph on them and framed it up and laminated it and stuck it on the wall of the corridors in the school. You see, what you would then have is you'd have role models of people who look the same as the people in the school, who sound the same as the people in the school, who walk the same as the people in the school, who walked those same corridors, who lived in that same neighbourhood. People just like your kids who have achieved something great out of education, out of using their brain. You see, those, I think, are the role models we need. And imagine if every corridor had so the children at school couldn't get away from them. They were all surrounded by them. Maybe that would convince them that success through education is possible for them. So that's the first thing, role models, I think. Secondly, I think self-confidence. We want our children to be self-confident. How do you build self-confidence? Well, I don't think you build self-confidence by competition. I think the only way you build self-confidence is by comparing yourself with yourself. You know, those of you who are parents, do you all do that thing with your kids as they grow up? You know, they get them to stand against the wall and you put a ruler, then you put a mark on the wall and you write January 2010 and then January 2011. Why do we do that? We do that because children don't notice that they're growing. And that shows them that they are growing. Oh, yeah, I am. Wonderful. But you see, I think that's what we need to have for every child at school. We need to have a personal record. It's a visual record, something they can see that shows them that this month they're actually doing more spelling words right than last month. That this month they're actually reading more pages than they were last month. Some kind of visual display so they can compare themselves with themselves. And that's how we build self-confidence, that feeling that, hey, I am getting better at this. So that's role models, self-confidence. The third one, I think, is self-esteem. What is self-esteem? Well, it's an odd kind of a term, really. We don't really, some people would even say it doesn't exist, but I think everyone knows what self-esteem is. It's a feeling of self-worth, isn't it? Of being a worthy person. Now, I get to work a lot with parents, and I often say to parents, one of the problems in developing self-esteem in your children is connecting all your approval to their performance, to what they do, and not who they are. And sometimes I think parents in particular treat children as human doings rather than human beings. And I think it's very, very important that we focus on the being of the child, who that child is, to help that child develop self-worth. Because if all of our approval is connected to their performance, their achievement, then one day when they don't achieve that, does that mean they're not worth anything anymore? So I think we've got to value them for who they are, as well as what they achieve, but primarily for who they are. So that's role models, self-confidence, self-esteem. Fourth one, last one, is reaction to challenges. I think the way in which children react to the challenge of learning something new is absolutely critical. And because this is all that's happening in every classroom every day, is that they're being confronted with a teacher saying, you've got to learn this new stuff. How do they react to that? Now, I've got a little exercise for you to see if I can demonstrate this point. At great personal cost, I have sent from New Zealand 2 enormous boxes full of juggling balls, and sitting outside the doors here right now are 2 guys with each box, and they've got 1,000 sets of juggling balls that they're going to bring in here in a minute, and I'm going to distribute juggling balls to everyone in this room, and in the next 15 minutes I'm going to teach you all how to juggle. How would that be? Do you notice what's happening right now, though? Inside your mind, you're having a reaction. And I guess it probably starts with, is he serious? And you're still not sure, are you? But the next reaction is something like, there's probably some people in the room who instantly said to themselves, oh yes, that'd be wonderful. I've always wanted to learn how to juggle. That'd be fabulous. And there'll be someone else who's sitting there saying, oh yeah, might be all right. Might be better than sitting here. And there'll be someone else who's sitting there saying, oh no, Not me, not going to get me to do that. And there'll be someone else who's sitting there going, no way, I can't do that, this man's mad, I could never do that, that's impossible, let me out of here. Anyone running for the exit? But what you're having is you're having a reaction to a challenging situation. You see? And this is what happens. It's all right, I'm not going to teach you how to juggle. I'm sorry. It could be arranged, but probably not today. But the point being is you have a reaction to a challenge to learn something new. And this is what every child has in every single class, every single day. They have reactions to learning new things. And do we manage those reactions as teachers? Do we teach children how to manage those reactions themselves? Because it's crucial. Because if they have an adverse reaction to the thought of learning something new, then it's going to put a big block in their way straight away. So that's efficacy. Second point is agency. What agency means is the skills, techniques and strategies of effective learning. Now this is the work that I've been doing for Malcolm Nicholson in The Hague, and looking at the ATLs, looking at approaches to learning across the MYP and out into the PYP and the DP, and looking at building a good skills base of the skills of good learning. And, excuse me, and those skills you can break down to three areas: cognitive skills, affective skills, and metacognitive skills. Now the cognitive skills are all the things that you're very familiar with, you know, communication, collaboration, information literacy, media literacy, critical thinking, creative and innovative thinking, reflection, transfer, and there's probably a few others I've forgotten. But they're the skills that you're very familiar with. But there's also self-management, and in self-management you could probably tease that out into two areas. One is kind of time management, becoming a better time manager, which is definitely a skill. And the other is the affective skills. As I was mentioning before, skills like persistence, perseverance, skills like managing challenge, skills like developing resilience, skills like doing what's hard. And this is a critical one. This is one I love working with, especially with kids. You know, I say to kids when I'm in schools, I say to them, you know, you're on the path to getting your GCSE or your IGCSE or your NCEA or your diploma. Do you think it's going to be easy or hard to get that qualification? And they all go, oh yeah, it's going to be hard. And I say, well, how are you going to do that? What is your strategy for doing something that's hard? And I start to talk about courage. Because that's what courage is. Courage is deliberately doing something that you know is going to be hard. And that's courage. But that's such a great frame-up for this concept, especially with boys. Also with girls, but especially with boys. Courage. It's going to take courage to get your diploma. It's going to take courage to get your GCSEs. Now there's an interesting way of describing it. And of course with all these affective skills there are several ways that they can be taught. They can be taught explicitly, they can be taught experientially. And the explicit way is the simplest way, which is the way in which we can teach any affective skill. I'll give you the example with the courage strategy. All you've got to think of is a time when you had that. So can you all think for a minute, right now, what's the hardest thing you've ever done? Now you see, I know I can do this with adults, because every adult has had a time where they've had to pull themselves up by their own bootstraps, where they've had to get past it, they've had to get over it, they've had to get on with it, they've had to deal with something that was really, really hard to deal with. So think about that thing. And it might have been a time when you changed jobs, or you changed cities, or you changed in some way. You had to upskill. It might be a time when you were preparing for a plenary address. It might be a time when you were having to go on stage, when you were having to sing, when you were having to do something. Of course, it also might be some personal tragedy that you've had to overcome, that you've had to deal with, that you've had to get over. So think about that for a second. But that's not the important thing. The important thing is, how did you do it? How did you get yourself to do that hard thing? What did you do? Analyze it. Break it down. Work it out. What is your strategy? How do you get yourself to do something that's really, really hard? And if you think about that enough, you'll probably discover that there'll be a thinking strategy. There'll be something that you say to yourself, probably something that you imagine, some way of setting yourself up mentally. There'll be a physical strategy, probably. You might have to tough yourself up. You might have to change your posture. You might have to do something physical. There'll also be an associative strategy, like who are the people that you pull in, who are the people that you rely on, who are the people that you use for support. You put all that together and it's a strategy. It's your strategy for courage. And I know you've all got one, because you've had to. But you see, when you're dealing with children, often they don't have. You say, what's the hardest thing you've ever done? And they say, oh, I lost my cell phone. Does that count? Often teenagers haven't had the experience of having to overcome difficulty. So this is why I think one of the most important roles of parents is to make them suffer. And teach them how to overcome that suffering. I did this with my own children, you see. And I got a really good example of this because years ago, about 10 years ago, I took all my children bungee jumping. Do you all know what bungee jumping is? Yep. Anyone been bungee jumping here? Oh, look, heaps of people. Awesome. Excellent. Well, a few people anyway. Excellent. You see, what I did was I thought this would be a good exercise for my kids. And so it was one weekend, 10 years ago, and I was home and all my kids were home. And my wife was away for the weekend. I'm not sure whether that was significant or not, but anyway. So I said to my kids, do you want to go bungee jumping? They went, yeah, right, let's go. So we pile in the car and we drive from Raglan over to Rotorua. And I had done bungee jumping once before, you see, so I knew how they did it. So as we're driving over, I'm really, really mean. As we're driving over, I say to my kids, what's going to happen at this bungee thing is this. And I explain to them all the process. What happens is, you're going to be up there hundreds of metres up in the air and maybe on a crane or under a bridge or something. And the guy's going to sit you down and he's going to strap your legs up. He's going to get it all velcroed up. He's going to get it really straight. So it's perfectly safe. And then he's going to count you down. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, bungee. And what he's going to say is, he's going to say, on 5, I want you to take the first step forward. And then 4, you take the second step. 3, 2, 1, and then bungee. Because what he's trying to do is trying to get you to do it without thinking. Because if you think about it, you might not do it. And then he won't get paid, which is not good for his business. So they always try and get you to do it without thinking. So I said to my kids, if you want an extra challenge, try telling the guy to be quiet, to not count you down. And once you're all strapped up, just shuffle forward till you're on the edge, and look down at that 100-metre drop under your feet and notice the voice that's screaming in your ear. And it's saying, you're going to die, you're going to die, don't do this, don't do this, don't do that. And there is a voice like that. True. And I said to them, notice that voice, notice it, and try and quieten it down. Try and quieten it down, and quieten it down, and quieten it down, till you've got control over it. And then do it. So we get over there. And of course I had to do it first to demonstrate it. And I said to my kids, you don't have to go bungee jumping, we can do something else, have an ice cream. You don't have to do it. And you don't have to do it my way, you do it whatever you like. But of course they all did, all 4 of them. And they all did it that way. They all told the guy to be quiet, they all shuffled up, they all did it, they all jumped off. And the funny thing was, the older they were, the more difficult it was. My oldest boy, who would have been 19 at the time, he gets up the edge and you can see he is tense. But he did it, threw himself off. My youngest boy, 14 years old, goes off. No thinking going on at all. Typical 14-year-old. But the thing was, by the time they got down to the bottom, once it was all over and we were all down the bottom together, they were 10 foot tall. I don't mean they've been stretched. They felt 10 foot tall. They were amazing. And they still refer back to that day, 10 years on, as being the day that proved to them that they could do things that they thought were impossible. And my kids have all got amazing resilience and amazing capacity to do hard things. And I think that's one of the things we can do for kids. I'm not suggesting you take all your kids bungee jumping, but putting children in situations where they have to draw out extra resources to feel the fear and do it anyway is an amazing way to teach effective skills. So, anyway, So there's the cognitive skills, the affective skills, I better move on, there's the metacognitive skills. Now the metacognitive is probably the most important, the most significant skill cluster to teach. Because all metacognition means is looking at your present learning and stepping out of that and looking at how you're doing it. From the point of view of process, from the point of view of strategy, and look at, is the strategy I'm using at present working? And if it's not, being prepared to change it, being prepared to do something new. That's all metacognition is. Analysing your own processes, working out if it works, and making some changes. So obviously to make the changes you have to be taught the cognitive and the affective skills that you can put in place. But metacognition, the whole driver for all, I think, all this new paradigm of learning, the metacognitive thing on a regular basis, what I certainly try and encourage children to do is on a regular basis to reflect on content, skills and strategy use. To reflect on what I've learnt today, what I understand and what I don't understand yet, and the questions I've got that I'd like to ask the teacher the next day. That's the content side of it. Then the skills, what are the ATL skills that I have learnt or I have been practicing today, and how competent do I feel in those skills myself? And I think self-assessment is the way to assess skills. And the third one is strategy use. What are the teaching strategies the teacher has used with me today? What are the learning strategies I have used today, and how effective have they been for me? You know, did I learn well from that video the teacher showed? Did I learn well from that podcast? Did I learn well when we had an independent piece of work to do? Just reflecting on that. Content, skills, and strategy use. That's the full metacognitive bundle, so to speak. So where am I? So we've got efficacy, agency, and action. Efficacy is self-belief. Agency are the skills. And action is the ability to take action, make mistakes, and fail well. Now, what that means is simply this. This failing well thing comes from research I did for my master's degree, which I've done quite recently, finished in 2008. And what I had at that time was I had a study of academically able students across a school in New Zealand, from year 9 to year 13. That's 13-year-olds to 18-year-olds. And these were the top students, the best students in the school. And I was studying them and trying to see any connection between academic performance and resilience, or anything else I could find a connection with, trying to please my professor. And what happened was halfway through the study, all these students had an exam. And some of these students, keep in mind that they're all the top ability students, some of these students passed at the very top level, passed brilliantly. Some of these students did reasonably well, and some of them did very, very poorly. So I kind of got rid of that middle group and just looked at the ones who did brilliantly compared with the ones who did very, very poorly, and tried to find some difference between them. And I analysed it 1,000 different ways and came up with absolutely nothing that was consistent. And then I started doing interviews, and I discovered something amazing. I discovered the most significant factor between those who'd done brilliantly and those who'd done poorly was their ability to what I ended up calling fail well. And what that means is simply that in a failure situation, and all I defined failure as was setting a goal and not achieving it. Not achieving a goal that you set for yourself. Those that failed well were those who would look back at those that failed well in that failure situation. First, they would acknowledge that they had some failure. They'd be prepared to say, yep, that was a failure. Second, they'd look back at that failure and look at the process and analyse the process and work out how they'd achieved that result. Third, they would look at it from the point of view of strategy and technique and work out which bit in their previous strategy didn't work. Fourth, they would put in place a new strategy. And fifth, they'd have another go. Simple as that. And that was failing well. And it turned out there was only one way to fail well. But there were a whole host of ways to fail badly. And failing badly were things like blaming the school or the system. A dumb school, a dumb curriculum, how can I be expected to work under these conditions? Blaming people. Dumb teacher, it was my parents' fault, it was my peers' fault, it was my teacher's fault, it was always someone else's fault. Another one was denying that failure exists. Some group of students who were saying, no, I'm doing fine, everything's fine, even though they were failing. No, everything's fine, just completely ignoring it. Another one was adding drama to failure. You ever heard of anyone doing this? You know, like, I got 60% of my geography test and my life is over. I can't go to school again. Everyone's going to laugh at me. No one will respect me anymore. I can't be seen in public. I got only 60%. People who add so much drama to a failure that it's too big to deal with. You add enough drama, you can't deal with it. Another strategy, failing badly strategy, was to avoid any possible action that could possibly result in failure. These were students who would only ever do anything at school that had already done before, that they already knew how to do. They'd never try anything new, just in case they had some failure. And if they ever did try an option that they had not done before, the first time they had any failure, they'd drop it completely and go back to the mainstream again. And there were other ways of failing badly. But the thing was, there was only one way of failing well, and there were a whole host of ways of failing badly. Now, this was a significant difference between these groups, and it was 100% significant. 100% significant. Every student at the top level had this failing well factor. Every student at the bottom didn't. And if you think about that, if you take on board this model, what it's saying is that there are now 3 outcomes for any task. Instead of just success and failure, there's now success, failing well, and failing badly. And 2 of those are good. So there's something interesting for you to think about. And so this is what I think we need to do. This is what I think we need to do for our students. I think we need to help them build self-belief. I think we need to teach them the skills, and we need to set them up in situations where it's possible for them to fail well in a safe environment. And so I guess the question is, how do we put that into teaching practice presently? Oh, if you're interested in that failing well thing, I'll make a little plug here. I have written a book called The Importance of Failing Well, but it's not finished yet. On my website, if you want to go and have a look, you're perfectly welcome to do so. And so how do we incorporate all this into teaching? Now, I've been noticing some changes happening around the world in the last few years. And for the last 2 years, every class I work with, I have been asking the students, how many of you have a web-capable phone? And 2 years ago, I was getting 5%. It's hard to believe, but it's true. 5% 2 years ago. This year, I had my first 100% class. That's happened in 2 years. Suddenly, 100% of students in that particular class had web-capable phones. So how long is it going to be before every child in every class, certainly in the senior school, has got a device in their pocket which can connect to all the information, all the knowledge, all the wisdom in the universe that they're not allowed to use? Now, I think this is significant. And I think it's one part of a thing that's happening across the world. I think that there are 4 factors coming together right now for the first time in history which make the development of where I started from, self-regulated learning, possible. Truly possible, for maybe the first time ever. And these factors are these. The first factor is the proliferation of learning skills-based curricula around the world. It's not just the IB that's putting in programs to develop the skills of good learning. I can think of 9 countries that have created in the last 12, 24 months, have created their own learning skills curriculum and are teaching the children how to learn as being a high priority, especially at a younger age. So that's the first thing, the proliferation of learning skills curricula around the world. The second factor is the creation of good subject-based websites, school subject-based websites. There are over 100 school subject-based websites that I know of that are excellent. I mean, you're all familiar, I'm sure, with the Khan Academy. Everyone knows the Khan Academy. But are you also familiar with Brightstorm? Are you familiar with Get Revising? Are you familiar with S-Cool? Are you familiar with Quizlet? Are you familiar with Easy Notes? Are you familiar with all those different sites? There are heaps of them. Topmarks, there's an excellent one. Look at Topmarks. It is actually an educational database. You go into Topmarks and you put in the subject you're interested in and the level that you're interested in, and it will bring up links to all the best websites in that subject area at that level. I have done something similar, not as fancy as Topmarks, mine is very primitive, but on my website, which I don't think I've mentioned what it is, it's dowlearn.com if you're interested, which is spelled T for Tony, A for Alpha, O for Oscar, and then the word learn.com. And on that website, if you go on that website and you go down the side to student tips for students, you click on that, it brings up this big list of school subject-based websites, links to school subject-based websites. And there's a huge number of them. But as I said, Top Marks is probably the best, and that's probably the easiest one to use. And also on my website, I should mention that what I've been talking about today, I've written an article called The Teaching Revolution and the IB. And if you go to my website, go to Teacher Resources, then that article's there. You're welcome to have that article. And also I delivered a workshop, pre-conference workshop on Thursday, and all the slides for my pre-conference workshop are also under Teacher Resources on my website. So you're welcome to have a look at all that. Okay, so that's just the first factor is the proliferation of learning skills curricula. The second factor is the number of school subject-based websites. The third factor is the ubiquity of internet connectable devices and high-speed broadband. Of course, it's not everywhere and it's not in every school, but more and more schools are becoming connected to high-speed broadband, and everyone's got a device of some sort. And the fourth one is just simply the comfort, the level of comfort all your students have with the digital world. See, this is the disadvantage of the How generation, is that we're not that comfortable. Well, I guess I should speak for myself. I'm not that comfortable with the digital world. I find keeping up with Twitter and Facebook to be a complete pain. But, you know, you do it anyway. And all the blogs that I have to read and all this kind of stuff, it's just kind of overwhelming. Whereas kids, it's just part of their life. You know, what's the very first thing your children do when they get out of bed in the morning? Before they go to the bathroom, they get their phone out and they check what's going on, what's happening. You know, they're so comfortable with the digital world. So you put all those factors together and you've got the possibility of developing self-regulated learning within the standard classroom. And you see, the only way that we develop the skills of self-regulated learning is by allowing or enabling children to practice self-regulated learning in our classroom. They don't learn how to be a self-regulated learner by being told how it works. They learn it by doing it. So you've got to imagine this. How are we going to do this? And of course, the skills of the self-regulated learner are, like I said before, self-managed, self-motivated, self-directed, autonomous, independent, whatever you want to call it. Those are the skills required by universities. Those are the skills that are required by business, and those are the skills that are required by industry, all forms of commercial enterprise. Those are the skills that everyone's saying they need these days. 21st century skills, global enterprise skills. They're all the same skills. These are the skills we need in our kids if they're going to have an advantage in the world. So you've got to imagine a classroom. Imagine a classroom where the teacher's focus is on what I call POSPIGIL. I'm known for my terrible acronyms, and this is one of them. It's process-oriented, skills-based guided inquiry learning. The POSPIGIL revolution. Process-oriented, skills-based guided inquiry learning. As someone in a workshop in New Zealand said a couple of weeks ago, he said, "Lance, your acronyms are terrible. That one's just impossible to remember." But anyway, so imagine a classroom where what the teacher is doing is coming into the classroom. They're putting up the objectives on the board. They're putting up the questions to be answered. They're putting up the clear, measurable objectives to be achieved in the lesson. And they've organised it so there is a number of websites that are available for students to access. He then puts students into groups of 3 or 4. Oh, are you familiar with Sugata Mitra's work? Wonderful man, look him up. Sugata Mitra created something called MIE, which is minimally invasive education. It's a lovely term. But he has proved conclusively and absolutely, I think, that one internet connection per child does not work. That child gets distracted, loses focus, doesn't feel connected with anyone else, doesn't work well at all. One internet connection per child does not work. One internet connection per group of 3 or 4 works brilliantly, absolutely brilliantly. High levels of exploration, high levels of retention, high levels of understanding. So the teacher comes in, puts up the objectives, puts up the questions, has organised websites to enable kids to access to, puts them into groups of 3 or 4, assigns roles. You know, one person will be the researcher, one person will be the questioner, the guide, the person defining the journey, one person will be the recorder, recording the whole thing, and one person maybe is the boss, the director. And of course they rotate those roles. And this is in any subject. So then what the child is doing is exploring for themselves, guided inquiry learning through good internet resources. Of course, there's going to be difference in levels of skills of the children across the class, so this is where the skills-based stuff comes in. So the teacher has to focus on teaching the skills of good learning. This is where ATL makes this possible. Teaching the skills of good learning using your subject matter, your content, as the material to work those skills on. And I think this is all now possible. I think that we're at the point where we can do these things. We can achieve self-regulated learning within a standard classroom. And of course, it does solve a whole lot of problems if you think about it. It's like learning styles. You know, for the last 20 years, we've all been fussing about learning styles. Is this boy more kinesthetic? Is he more visual? Is he more auditory? How do I cope with that? And then we've got Gardner's 7 or 8 or 9 intelligences, and can we develop that intelligence? And all these different ways we've got to put into our teaching. Well, this solves all that problem. Because you see, if Johnny, little Johnny, has got 10 websites in biology that he can explore to answer some specific question and meet some specific objectives, then he will find that some of those websites specialise in video, some of those websites specialise in audio, podcasts, and some of those websites have got lots of games to play, lots of activities. So he will find the website that suits him best. And he then makes it his favourite, goes back to that each time. You don't have to worry about learning styles anymore. In terms of guided inquiry learning, when all the knowledge is in the head of the teacher or in the textbook, it's really hard to set up guided inquiry learning because the children have to take a journey inside the teacher's head. That's a bit difficult. But when all the information is available in good quality school subject-based websites, then guided inquiry just becomes creating the right questions, helping the children to follow their journey, teaching the skills of inquiry, teaching the skills of learning. And Bloom's, you know, Bloom's taxonomy. One of the terrible things about teaching in a teach to the test, tick the box, standard-based education system is that you're always teaching the bottom 3 levels of Bloom's, aren't you? You're teaching understanding, remembering, and applying. And that is so dull. As a teacher, there's got no juice in it, has it? You're always just teaching them stuff that they need to recall for the next test that they need to recall it on. It has no juice. If you're doing it this way through guided inquiry learning, you can actually move up into evaluation, synthesis, and creativity. You can actually get the children to take information from half a dozen websites, analyse it, compare it, contrast it, validate it. What's the best information? How do you know that? You can move up into the higher levels of Bloom's, and that's where the enjoyment is. That's what makes teaching worth doing, I think. So it seems to me that right now we are on the verge of a revolution, a possible revolution, but of course it's not going to be compulsory. With the new MYP, I'm sure teachers are still going to be able to teach, if they want, pretty much the way they always have. You know, go to the filing cabinet, no, where's last year's? Take the dust, take the lesson out and go into the classroom and teach by transmission the way they always have. They might have new boxes to tick and new definitions to write in. And, how do we get a concept? And yeah, that was probably the concept we did. And teachers are going to be able to do it however they want. There is going to be no compulsion to generate self-regulated learners in your classroom. No compulsion at all. But there is a possibility now. But of course, doing that is going to take courage. But you see, you know what your courage strategy is now, don't you? So you can do it. And I think it puts the heart back in teaching. I think it puts the juice back in teaching. You know, a much wiser man than me once said, good teaching involves putting children in situations, difficult situations, out of which they can only get by thinking. And I think that's what teaching is about. I think that's what makes us enjoy teaching. And so, I guess what I'm saying is that I think that this is the first time, this is the first opportunity, probably since Gutenberg developed the printing press and we started producing textbooks. Work on chapter 3, answer the questions at the end of the chapter. The first time since Gutenberg, maybe the first time since Socrates, we've actually got the possibility of totally changing our ways of teaching. And I think it's exciting, and I think the IB can lead the way. And this is why I'm excited, and this is why I'm involved in this process. And I'd be really interested in talking to anyone today about that. So feel free to come and see me today. Just in closing, I think I've covered everything. But just in closing, I'd just like to sum up and say, in all my years of experience teaching, I've learned that there are two key principles that underlie all great teaching. Principle number one is never tell them everything you know. Thank you. Have a good day.